So we've got free college, the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, higher taxes. These are some of the campaign promises that we've heard so far from the 2020 candidates for the Democrat side. But Bernie Sanders, the godfather of a lot of these ideas, is now facing a headwind from the party that he is running to represent. Here's longtime Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks.
If he wants to be a Democrat, he should register in the Democratic Party. And then you can talk about running and to be my representative. I want a Democrat to be my representative as President of the United States.
Joining me now, Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show on the Daily Wire, and Austin Goolsbee, economics professor at University of Chicago's Booth School of Business and former chief economist under President Obama. Gentlemen, welcome. Great to have both of you with me tonight. So, Michael, let me start with you. You say that despite the fact that Bernie Sanders had a pretty impressive initial haul of money, you think that he's actually going nowhere in this race. How come?
I think the money bomb means nothing. People forget that Ron Paul raised precisely the same amount of money in precisely the same amount of time 12 years ago. Ron Paul will never get his party's nomination, nor will Bernie Sanders, though actually for opposite reasons. I think the argument that the congressman just made, that Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat and therefore he shouldn't run as a Democrat, is ridiculous. Who cares how he's registered? Bernie Sanders has redefined the Democrat Party according to his radical ideological lines. All of these Democrat candidates now are spouting this sort of policy proposals that Bernie Sanders in his 2016 campaign embraced. And so the question is, because of Bernie's success, why would anybody vote for him now, an old white man, when they have so many more attractive candidates for an identity-obsessed, already radicalized Democrat Party?
Well, we'll see. I mean, that may be one of the reasons that some folks are pushing out videos like this of him back in 1985. Take a quick look at this, and we want to hear from Austin.
You know, it's funny, sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death.
So it's good that we have bread lines. Austin, what do you make of this whole Bernie Sanders? I mean, how do you think he's going to fare in all of this? He had, I think, a stronger start than most people thought he was going to.
Yes and no. You know, last time in 2016, he was the obvious receptacle of the anti-Hillary segment of the party. And so, it felt like it went forever. And he was kind of the hot, fresh pizza, and now the pizza's been sitting there for 4 years. And I do think Michael's right. Look, you got candidates from New York, you got candidates from California. There's a bunch of different parts of the Democratic Party, let's say, that each person's representing. Here's an old white guy from Vermont. And
you guys are really picking on the old white guy. That's not a very popular phrase in a lot of quarters. But when you take a look at the chances, though, of who can, whether or not President Trump can be beat, Michael, let me get your thoughts on this. Put up this Fox News poll. Excellent, 19%, good, 36%. And President Trump's favorability rating is down around 43% right now. So you've got a pile on from a number of people, including Donna Shalala, and then you've got the AOC spokesperson, Corbin Trent, who says that they refuse to endorse Bernie for 2020. We're excited to see many progressives in the race. We're not thinking at all about the next election. It raises a lot of questions about who will be ordained and just how far left that person is likely to be in the end.
This is the trouble of the Bernie Sandersization of the Democrat Party, is I think a generic Democrat absolutely could beat President Trump in 2020. The trouble is there's no such thing as a generic Democrat. And when you have all of these individual candidates with all of their individual weaknesses, Joe Biden, he's not yet in the race. It certainly seems that he's going to run. But if we're talking about stale pizza, as Austin used the phrase, I think Joe Biden has been stale since 1988.
A fresh hot pizza. He went from being an old white guy to a fresh hot pizza.
I didn't say
Austin, thank you. We're going to be talking about Bernie Sanders, I think, for some time to come as we watch all this. Thanks, guys. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks.
There are huge disparities in this country based on race.
Absolutely.
And they cannot be denied, and they must be addressed. So when we're talking about recognizing the inequalities, the inequities, it's not about saying I'm trying to take from those who have achieved success if they've played by the rules and worked hard. Good for you, keep it. But I am saying we need to be honest and address that not everyone has an equal opportunity to access to success, and we've got to address that.
California Senator Kamala Harris talking about reparations. It has come up on the campaign trail. Elizabeth Warren now supporting this as well. For African Americans, we must confront the dark history of slavery and government-sanctioned discrimination in this country that has had many consequences, including undermining the ability of black farmers to build wealth in America for generations. We need systemic, structural changes to address that. This has come up before. The last cycle, Bernie Sanders was asked about reparations and what he thought about them.
Why you weren't in favor of reparations?
Well, again, it's the same reason that the president is not, and I think,
and what is that reason?
Secretary Clinton is not. We have got to invest in the future. What we have got to do is address poverty in America, something that very few people talk about, and especially poverty in the African American community and the Latino community.
The president, obviously, he's talking about President Obama, who spoke out against that as well. Just one of the examples of kind of going left, at least part of the 2020 field. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News media analyst Howard Kurtz, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Reuters. Howie, we're getting more and more examples of at least part of this field really touching base with the progressive side of the party to try to tap into that.
Maybe this business about Kamala Harris coming off reparations, maybe this is her wall. It cites her base, but it will never be built. I'm frankly kind of stunned, as we just saw, too radical for Bernie. Barack Obama never touched it, that Senator Harris, Elizabeth Warren, would come out for this. I understand she may be trying to excite her African-American base in the case of Senator Harris. I understand it may be important to talk about racial inequality, but this is the kind of thing that can turn off white moderate voters who might be looking for an alternative to Trump, and I think that it gives the GOP a very fat target, and it could open an even greater lane for a more center-left candidate like Amy Klobuchar, or, if he ever finishes his Hamlet act and gets on the stage, Joe Biden.
Molly.
Yeah, if socialism, vegetarianism, and reparations are the campaign theme for the eventual Democratic nominee, it sounds like Donald Trump will win in a landslide. But that's what the talk has been this week, have been some of these very far-left views. That it does appeal to a certain constituency, but on a larger scale, I'm not sure how well it will go. We need to have details on what do these reparations mean so that people can determine whether they want, as taxpayers, you know, a nation of immigrants, and a lot of them are taxpayers, they'll need to know whether they are on board with the reparations.
Similar to details about the Green New Deal, which has now been called aspirational and kind of a resolution, but we've kind of laid it out as it's been written so far this week in different elements of it.
Yes, and it all does come down to the details. It is interesting to see what people's larger scale is, what their big vision is, but we need to get much more nitty-gritty.
Our Fox News poll most recently, socialism and capitalism, and the split in parties, favorable, unfavorable. You can kind of see where this stands, and this is across both parties, but for Democrats, it's much tighter, the favorable, unfavorable on socialism, capitalism. Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's probably one reason why President Trump keeps bringing it up.
I mean, you're clear. You're sensing that this is one of the main pillars he's going to run on.
I mean, he keeps coming back to it. Even in his speech just about Venezuela from Miami a few days ago, he spent as much time talking about problems in that country as he did talking about this is something we can't have in our own country, and that was a clear reference to people like Bernie Sanders and others. So yeah, I think that word is going to come up. I think that issue is going to come up. But going back to the conversation we were just having, I think reparations is a word, and that was part of the question for those presidential candidates. But I think when we get to the details, if this continues to be a theme, it'll be more about trying to work on income inequality, trying to make sure that poor people, both African Americans and Latinos, as they mentioned, have more opportunities and have policies that can help them. Whether or not it ends up being a check, which is probably what people think of when they hear reparations, I'm not so sure that's what they're talking about.
There are candidates in the Democratic Party who are speaking more towards the center part of the party. Here's John Delaney on the trail.
A lot of people are talking about climate change and all these kind of things they want to do, most of which are completely impractical. If we want to win, if we want to beat Trump, we should not put up a candidate who embraces socialism.
So he's out there talking about that. You mentioned Joe Biden. We don't know if he's getting in, but likely would have similar talk. And Amy Klobuchar, who has another article in the New York Times now about this treatment of staff. in which she's addressed many times, including here on the panel. An aide joining her on a trip to South Carolina in 2008 had procured a salad for his boss while hauling their bags through an airport terminal. But once aboard, he delivered the grim news. He had fumbled the plastic eating utensils before reaching the gate, and the crew did not have any forks on such a short flight. What happened next was typical. Ms. Klobuchar berated her aide instantly for the slip-up. What happened after that was not. She pulled a comb from her bag and began eating the salad with it, according to 4 people familiar with the episode. Then she handed the comb to her staff member with a directive, clean it. Howie, this is now probably the 6th article citing anonymous sources.
And that's the point. I'm not going to defend Combgate, and maybe she did some things she shouldn't have done. But there are probably about a half a dozen former aides to Amy Klobuchar who have been talking to HuffPost, BuzzFeed, now the New York Times, trashing her. She's so difficult to work for. She's so cruel to her staff. I don't think this resonates with voters. What, she's tough on her staff? She says she's tough on herself, and she has high standards for her staff. It just seems the kind of thing that if these people feel so strongly, having worked or dealt with Amy Klobuchar, that she is a terrible person, then they ought to go on the record. And as long as they're doing the anonymous sniping from behind a curtain of protection granted by journalists, I think it's unfair, and I don't think it goes anywhere.
Here she is last night addressing this again.
I am really proud of our staff. Ben's been with me 7 years. You can ask him, and we do really great work. And you know, I am just not that many people have raised it here because I think they're much more focused on can you do the job, and I have shown that I can do the job.
I mean, it sounds like she's going to have to keep on answering this question.
Well, and this is a story that people in Washington, D.C. are very excited by. I agree that there are big problems with it being sourced anonymously to people who are going after a former boss. And I'm not sure that being a tough boss is a trait that will make people not vote for someone. I think it might even be, when they look at the results that she has achieved, they have a lot that they can go with. She has been a senator who has accomplished things in a tough environment. That's probably more important than if she's mean to her staff.
But let's be clear. I mean, we've heard these stories around Washington for some time. It's not just these articles. I mean, it's been floating out.
Yeah, I've heard it long before she was a presidential candidate, and I think that if there's anything we've learned in the last couple of years, the last year in particular, Americans do care that people treat each other well.